I never thought that in my old age I would witness everything I built with my own hands crumble. My name is Paul Baxter. I'm 67, and I live in a house I built myself in a suburb of Los Angeles almost 40 years ago. I was enthusiastic in those days, a young builder with ambition who had just married the beautiful Elaine. We bought this lot when there were no decent roads here yet. Evenings and weekends I worked on our future home until my hands were blistered. Elaine brought cold lemonade and sandwiches, sometimes helping with painting or cleaning up construction debris. When we finally moved in, we didn't even have proper furniture, just a mattress on the floor and a folding table. But it was our home, and we were happy. Now as I sit in my shabby chair on the veranda, it's not the same. Maybe it's the lack of a woman's hand. Elaine died 5 years ago of lung cancer. 28 months of struggle, chemotherapy, hope and disappointment. I held her hand until the very end. After she died, it's like the house lost its soul. I don't change the curtains she chose. Her plant pots stand where she placed them, even though half of the flowers have died, and I maintain the other half as best I can, remembering her instructions. Sometimes I think I can smell her perfume as I walk past our bedroom. Ethan, our only son, did not inherit my love of manual labor. Ever since he was a little boy, he's been a soft-spoken boy who prefers computer games to yard work. Elaine said he was just different, and that we needed to accept him for who he was. I tried. I honestly tried. When he turned 16, I bought an old Ford and offered to restore it together. I thought it would be a project that would bring us together. He worked on it for a couple weekends and lost interest. The car stayed in the garage until I finished it myself and then sold it. He changed 3 majors in college before settling on business administration. I paid for his education, though I offered him summer jobs to cover at least some of the costs. He always found reasons why he couldn't: an internship, unpaid, summer courses, or something else. After graduating, he got a job at some digital marketing company. I still don't really understand what he does there, though he explained it more than once, rolling his eyes at my technological ignorance. Ethan is now 38. He lives in a rented apartment on the other side of Los Angeles with his wife, Darcy Frost, whom he met 4 years ago at some conference. I remember his phone call. He was more excited than ever. "Dad, I met an incredible woman. She works in the cosmetics industry. She has her own brand. You just won't believe how smart and beautiful she is." I was happy for him. Elaine had always worried that Ethan would never find a mate. All his previous relationships had ended quickly and usually painfully. Our son wasn't known for his consistency in anything. His first meeting with Darcy was at a restaurant downtown. They were 20 minutes late. Darcy apologized, attributing the delay to just crazy traffic, although the roads were clear that evening. I checked before going out. Darcy looked exactly as I expected. A well-groomed brunette with a perfect manicure, a trendy haircut, and makeup that emphasized her high cheekbones. She was beautiful, the kind of modern, glossy beauty I'd seen in the advertising brochures that came in the mail. My Elaine at her age was very different, softer, warmer, with freckles on her nose and unruly brown curls. "So you're the Paul Baxter. Ethan's told me so much about you." Her voice sounded enthusiastic, but her eyes glided appraisingly over my clothes, my watch, my calloused hands that even years of retirement couldn't hide. Over dinner, she talked a lot about her company, a small startup making organic, ethically produced cosmetics. I asked about suppliers, production base, scale. Her answers were vague, with plenty of marketing terms. I realized that her brand was still just an online page and a few sample products custom, made by other manufacturers. "You have a very cozy house, Mr. Baxter," Darcy said when she and Ethan arrived for Sunday lunch a month later. She ran her finger along the wood trim on the wall. I'd carved the patterns myself 30 years ago. "But it's so big for one person. Have you ever thought of selling it?" That was the first chime, but I wrote it off as small talk. "No, I built this house with my own hands for our family. Every corner here holds memories." "Oh, that's so sweet." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. The wedding was 6 months after they'd met, a small ceremony at a fancy venue overlooking the ocean. I'd paid half the expenses, though Ethan had said Darcy's parents would help. At the last minute, it turned out they were having temporary financial difficulties. Darcy's parents turned out to be an ordinary family from the suburbs of Seattle. The father was a retired truck driver and the mother was a former school teacher. Nothing in common with successful high society entrepreneurs, as Darcy described them. After we married, their visits became regular. Every 2 weeks for lunch, I watched Darcy look around the house, lingering on the antique clocks I'd inherited from my father, the collection of antique tools hanging in the workshop, the paintings Elaine and I had bought at local art fairs. Sometimes she would ask questions. How much could a property like this in this neighborhood be worth now? I hear prices have skyrocketed. Gradually, Ethan began to change. He used to call just to talk, to ask how I was doing, to tell me some office story. Now his calls became targeted, to help pay for car repairs, to borrow money to invest in Darcy's business, to make a down payment on new furniture. I helped. He is, after all, my only son. But I sensed something was wrong. About a year ago, I overheard them talking when they thought I'd gone out in the garden. I forgot my glasses and went back into the house through the back door. Did you see how he can hardly walk up the stairs? He's getting old and infirm. Ethan's voice sounded concerned, but with a note of impatience. I've been telling you for 6 months. He needs to think about a nursing home. They're not like they used to be now. There are some very decent options. We could help him with the move. And the house. Well, it's still bequeathed to you, isn't it? Darcy spoke softly but insistently. I froze outside the door. I'm 66, and I do feel pain in my knees sometimes when I walk up the stairs. An old injury from the construction site makes itself felt on rainy days. But I'm still a sturdy man who can take care of himself and his home. A nursing home? The thought never crossed my mind. Yes, in the will, the house passes to me, but... No buts, Ethan. Your father has already lived his life. Now it's our turn. With the sale of this house, we could finally buy our own place, invest in my business. I quietly walked back out into the garden, not wanting to hear any more. That evening, I didn't pretend to hear their conversation, but something inside me snapped. I remembered Elaine taking my hand before she died and saying, "Look after Ethan. He's a good boy, but he's weak. I'm afraid he could easily be led away the wrong way." She was right, as always. Our son was always looking for easy paths and easily fell under the influence of stronger personalities. That stronger person used to be Elaine then, for a while me, now Darcy. Over the next few months, I watched as their behavior became more and more persistent. Darcy began sending me brochures of active senior living communities. Ethan started mentioning friends of his co-workers who were so happy after their parents moved to such places. "Can you believe it, Dad? There's a pool, a gym, weekly excursions." I smiled and nodded, but anger was growing inside. Not at Ethan. He'd always been like that. Easily led, a seeker of easy solutions. My anger was directed at Darcy, who was manipulating him, using his weaknesses to get to my property. Things got even worse when I happened to see their financial problems. Ethan had forgotten a file folder from me after asking for help sorting out his insurance. Among the papers, I found credit card delinquency notices, a letter from the bank about a possible mortgage denial due to a bad credit history, and bills for designer clothes for amounts that made my eyes water. Their financial situation was disastrous, and I was beginning to realize the real reason for their interest in my house and assets. Darcy wasn't just planning for a future inheritance. She needed the money now. I didn't bother saying I'd seen the documents. Instead, I called my longtime friend Quentin, who had worked in banking before retiring. We met for lunch, and I told him about the situation without going into detail. "Be careful, Paul," he said, sipping his coffee. "I've seen this kind of thing more than once. Starts with hints of a nursing home, ends with incapacitation and control of all assets." I didn't want to believe my own son could go to such lengths, but the young man who now came to visit me with Darcy was looking less and less like the boy Elaine and I had raised. His gaze became harder, his movements more nervous. He checked his cell phone constantly, as if he was afraid he'd miss an important call or message. When Darcy spoke, he looked at her with some mixture of fear and adoration. The last 3 years had turned my son into a man I barely recognized, and Darcy had become more insistent with each visit. For the past month, she was no longer shy about her innuendos. "Paul, I found a beautiful place just half an hour from here. My friend's mother lives there. She loves it. And best of all, they accept pets. You could get a dog for company. I'd never liked dogs. Elaine was allergic to hair, and we always got fish. Darcy should have known that. The pictures of our aquariums are still on the shelves. Thank you, Darcy, but I prefer to stay in my own home. But think of the practical side. This house requires so much maintenance. And your health? There is nothing wrong with my health, I retorted then, feeling my blood boil. Yesterday they came over for lunch again. I'd made a roast from Elaine's recipe, the only dish Darcy ate with gusto in my house. She usually favored organic food and superfood, but she never turned down a roast. At the table, the conversation turned to the fact that Ethan's company was downsizing and his position was in jeopardy. Darcy mentioned that an investor who promised to invest in her cosmetics brand backed out at the last minute. We're really struggling right now, Dad, Ethan said, looking down at his plate. I knew where this was going. Another request for money. But I hadn't expected Darcy to decide to act so bluntly. Paul, we need to have a serious talk about your house. She set her fork aside and looked me straight in the eye. Ethan and I have given it a lot of thought, and it makes sense for everyone. You're moving into a comfortable senior community where you'll be taken care of by professionals, and we're moving here. This will solve all of our problems. Ethan choked on his wine, apparently not expecting such bluntness from his wife. Darcy, that's not how we agreed to discuss this. But Darcy couldn't stop now. Ethan is your only heir. Sooner or later, the house will still be his. Why not do it now when we need the help so badly? That's taking care of the family too, isn't it? I looked at this woman who was practically demanding that I give her the house I'd built with my own hands for my wife, for my family. A house where every board is soaked with memories. The house where Elaine died. And I saw my son sitting there, eyes downcast, unable to object or defend me. In that moment, I realized, if I didn't do something drastic, they wouldn't stop. The next step would be talking to doctors about my deteriorating mental state, my age-related dementia, my inability to make decisions for myself. I knew how it worked. I had seen my neighbor Frank's son gain control of his finances and home in a matter of months, and a year later Frank died in a nursing home, alone and broken. I'm not going to let that happen to me, not after all I'd been through, not after all the years of hard work. But I also knew that a direct confrontation would accomplish nothing. Darcy already had too much influence over Ethan. I needed another plan. After that night, I watched Darcy and Ethan more closely. Their visits became more frequent. Now they came almost every weekend, bringing with them nursing home brochures, stories of happy old people making new friends in active senior communities, and endless innuendo. You know, Dad, Ethan once said, helping me trim the hedges, you said yourself that the garden takes a lot of energy. In the places Darcy told me about, the gardeners take care of it all. You could concentrate on your hobbies. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and looked at my son. Working in the garden was my hobby. I loved feeling the earth in my hands, watching the plants I planted grow, seeing the results of my labor. Elaine often joked that I talked to plants more than people. She wasn't far from the truth. Plants never disappointed me the way people did. Ethan, I've been working in this garden for 40 years, I answered calmly. Every bush here was planted with your mom. See that magnolia? We planted it when we knew you were coming into the world. Ethan looked away. I could see his internal struggle. A part of him remembered and appreciated our family history, but the other part, the part influenced by Darcy, already saw this house and garden as assets, as money to spend. Son-in-law, why don't we grab a beer? I suggested, trying to recapture the Ethan I'd known before. He nodded, and we sat down on the veranda with bottles of cold beer. There was silence for a few minutes, not tense, but almost cozy, like old times. How are things at work? I asked. Ethan sighed. Not easy. The bosses are demanding results, but clients are cutting budgets. Darcy says I should look for something better. And her business? How's it going? Ethan sipped his beer, avoiding my gaze. It's slow, but she has big plans. If we could find the investment to launch a full line, how much do you need? About $250,000 to start. He said it as casually as if he were talking about a couple hundred. I almost choked. $250,000 for a dubious business that didn't exist? My retirement savings were solid. I'd always been thrifty and farsighted, but not enough to throw around that kind of money. That's serious money, Ethan. I know, Dad. He twirled the bottle in his hands. Just think about it, okay? This is a family business. Your investment will help us and you. I knew Darcy was behind this conversation. Ethan would never have dared to ask for that kind of money on his own. He could lend $50 or $100, but not hundreds of thousands. The situation escalated 2 weeks later when Darcy showed up alone, unannounced. Paul, we need to talk, she said, walking uninvited into the living room where I was reading the paper. I'll be blunt. Ethan and I need money right away. We're in trouble with the bank, and they might repossess the car. I put the paper down. Sit down, Darcy. Explain what's going on. She sank into the chair across from me, adjusting her expensive blouse. Her nails were freshly painted bright red, and a new bracelet glittered on her wrist. We took out a loan to start my business, but the investor backed out at the last minute. If we don't make the payment by the end of the month, we're in serious trouble. Is the new bracelet part of your money problems? I nodded at her wrist. Darcy blushed slightly but quickly pulled herself together. It was a gift from a friend. Look, Paul, I know what you think of me, but I really love your son, and I want what's best for him. For you, too. So you're suggesting I move into a nursing home and give you the house I built with my own hands? It's a practical solution. There's a note of irritation in her voice. You'll get professional care, socialization with your peers, and we can start with a clean slate. Ethan is your only heir. Sooner or later, the house will be his anyway. Why not now, when we need help so badly? I stared at the woman and marveled at her insolence. She wasn't even trying to hide her true motives. Wouldn't it be easier to just wait until I was dead? I asked with bitter irony. Darcy shuddered. What a horrible thought. I just want everyone to be better off. You deserve to be comfortable in your old age. I am comfortable in my own home, and I don't need to be told where to live. She pursed her lips but quickly put a smile back on her face. You just haven't seen the places I'm talking about. They're like resorts, pools, spas, excursions. You could meet a new friend. She glanced meaningfully at Elaine's picture on the mantel. After all, it had been 5 years. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. Using the memory of my wife to manipulate me? That was a new level of despicable. I don't think we have anything more to discuss. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Darcy stood up as well, clutching her expensive purse. Think of your son, Paul. He's desperate. Do you really want to watch him suffer when you could help? I've always helped Ethan, and I will, but not like this. She left, slamming the door harder than necessary. After that visit, Ethan didn't call for almost a week. When he finally did, his voice sounded strained. Dad, I'm sorry about Darcy. She was too direct. Don't apologize for your wife, Ethan. Rather, tell me what's really going on with your finances. There was a pause. We're having some difficulties, but we'll get through it. What kind of challenges? I decided to push. I saw the paperwork you left with me. Credit cards are maxed out. Bills are overdue. What's going on? You went through my papers? His voice got rougher. They were on the table, Ethan, and I'm worried about you. Darcy is spending more than you can afford. Don't start, Dad. You just don't understand how modern business works. Sometimes you have to invest a lot to get more. And while you're investing, you're living on what? According to the bills, Darcy buys designer clothes and jewelry when you can't pay the rent. She needs to look a certain way for her brand. It's an image investment. I sighed. My son had always been naive, but now he sounded like a man repeating someone else's words without thinking about their meaning. Ethan, I just want you to be careful. Money has a way of running out. Don't worry, Dad. We have a plan. That was the end of our conversation, but his last phrase kept me on my toes. What plan? What are they up to? I decided to do my own investigation. A week later, when they came over for dinner again, I offered to help Darcy with the dishes while Ethan watched a baseball game in the living room. When she excused herself to the bathroom, I quickly checked her cell phone left on the kitchen table. I'm not proud of the act, but I felt like I had no choice. What I saw in her messages confirmed my worst fears. Correspondence from a realtor. The house is in great condition, The neighborhood is only growing in value. I estimate you could get about 1,200,000. When do you plan to put it on the market? Darcy's response, the house isn't ours yet. We need to work it out with my father-in-law, but we should be on the market within 6 months. 6 months. They gave me 6 months. I barely had time to put my phone back when I heard her footsteps. I spent the next few days distraught. I called my old friend, Attorney Howard, and explained the situation without going into detail about how I got the information. Paul, they can't make you sell the house or move, Howard said. You're sane, independent. They have no legal grounds. But they can make my life unbearable, or wait until I break a leg or get sick and then prove that I can't take care of myself. Howard thought for a moment. You're right, it happens. There are several ways to protect ourselves. We can make an incapacity power of attorney for someone you trust, excluding Ethan. We could revise the will. I listened to his advice, but another plan was already forming in my head. Radical, maybe even crazy. But the more I thought about it, the more right it seemed. 2 weeks later, Darcy and Ethan came to dinner with a new proposal. And Dad, we've been thinking, Ethan began as we sat down at the table. What if we moved in with you? We'll help with the house, the garden. You wouldn't have to go anywhere. I feigned interest. How do you envision that? We'd take the second floor, Darcy said. You've got 3 bedrooms up there that are empty. We'd pay our share of the utilities, help with the shopping. And your apartment? We'd rent it out, Darcy said quickly. It would even bring in a small income. Their plan was transparent. Move in, gradually take control of the house, and then take me out. A classic scheme. Sounds interesting, I lied. Let me think about it. They looked at each other with ill-concealed glee. They thought they'd won, but the real bomb went off a day later when Ethan called me in a state of near panic. Dad, we're in trouble. The bank refused to refinance, and we have to pay $15,000 by the end of the week or the foreclosure process will begin. $15,000? I acted surprised. Where'd you get that kind of money? Credit card debt? Interest accrued. He stammered, clearly not wanting to go into detail. What are you planning on doing? Dad, we need your help. Please, this is the last time. I kept quiet, forcing him to continue. If you could lend us that money or we could get a loan against the house. Just a small one, just to get out of this hole. That's it. If I agreed to a loan against the house, they'd have a legal hook. If I defaulted on the loan, and I had no doubt I would, the house could go to pay off the debt. It's a neat move. Come back tomorrow night, I said after a pause. We'll discuss it. The next day they arrived before I could prepare dinner. Darcy looked tense, but there was hope in her eyes. Ethan was pale and kept wiping his sweaty forehead. They hardly touched their food at dinner. Finally, Darcy couldn't take it anymore. Paul, have you thought about our proposal? Which one? The move or the home equity loan? Oh, both, she faltered. I put my fork down and looked at them. I'd been thinking a lot the last few days. About our family, about the future, about the house. They leaned forward, waiting for my decision. You're right about one thing. One man doesn't need a house this big, and I'm really not getting any younger. Darcy glowed. Ethan exhaled in relief. But a home equity loan is risky, I continued, especially with your credit history. Their faces tensed again. There is another option, I paused. I could sell the house and help you with your debts. Sell it? Ethan looked stunned. But you always said you'd never sell it. Times change, son. I'm getting older. I need to think practical. And where would you move to? Darcy asked cautiously. There are several possibilities. Maybe one of those senior communities you've told me so much about. I smiled at her. That's wonderful, Paul. She couldn't hide her excitement. When do you think you'll start the process? I already have. I contacted a realtor, got an appraisal. Realtor? What realtor? Darcy's tense. Just a recommendation. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. But we could help. I have a realtor who knows a real estate agent who, I said. I can handle it, Darcy, I said in a tone of voice that brooked no objection. This is my house after all. The rest of the evening passed in a strange atmosphere. They were both excited at the prospect of money from the sale and concerned that I was taking matters into my own hands. As they were leaving, Darcy couldn't take it anymore. Paul, this is a big decision. Are you sure you don't want us to help with the sale? After all, we have more experience in today's marketplace. Darcy, I looked her straight in the eye. If you're so worried about money, why don't you tell Ethan you've already contacted a realtor about selling my house before I even decided to sell it? She's pale. I don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't matter, I said with a wave of my hand. We all want the same thing, don't we? For the family to be happy. As their car rounded the corner, I went back inside and looked at Elaine's picture. I'm sorry, honey, I whispered. I know you love this house, but sometimes you have to let go of even the most precious things to keep your dignity. I picked up the phone and dialed Quentin's number. Hey, old friend, remember that conversation we had about disappearing? I need your help. It's time to take action. After talking to Quentin, I spent a sleepless night thinking about my decision. The picture outside the window had changed from inky darkness to a pale pink dawn, and I was still sitting in the chair looking at Elaine's picture. I used to talk to her often, ask her advice. Today I was silent. The decision was ripe, and I knew she would understand. Ethan called in the morning. His voice sounded excited. Dad, Darcy and I discussed your offer. That's very generous of you. You're welcome, son. Darcy found a terrific realtor. She thinks we could get a lot more if we put the house on the market right. Of course, Darcy's already found a realtor. She probably contacted him before they even left my place last night. I'm already working with a realtor, Ethan. Everything's under control. But Dad, Darcy knows real estate. Her friend sells houses to celebrities. Darcy could... Ethan, I interrupted him, I appreciate your concern, but this is my house and I'm going to sell it my way. There was a pause. Okay, when should we come over to discuss the details? Let's do it Friday. I'll cook dinner. I wasn't going to make any dinner. It was just a postponement to buy time. Right after the conversation, I called Quentin. Quentin, I need to meet with you and Howard. Tonight, if possible. We met at a small cafe downtown where no one knew us. Howard, my old friend and experienced lawyer, listened intently to the story, making occasional notes in his shabby notebook. What you're proposing, Paul, is legal, he said finally. But it's a radical solution. Are you sure? Absolutely, they won't stop. If I don't sell the house now, they'll find a way to get it later. And I'm not going to spend the last years of my life fearing my own family. I can help with the legalities, Howard nodded. But you have to act fast. And I can help with the paperwork and banking, Quentin added. I still have connections. But Paul, think again. You're going to disappear from your son's life. I looked at my hands. They were covered with old calluses and stains. The hands of a man who had worked hard all his life. Hands that had held newborn Ethan, taught him to ride his bike, wiped away tears when he fell. My son disappeared a long time ago, I said quietly. The man I see now is just a puppet in Darcy's hands. The next days passed in feverish activity. Howard contacted a reliable realtor and explained the situation. The house was appraised and listed for sale at below market value with a quick cash deal. Quentin helped me open a new bank account in Paul Mercer's name, my mother's name before marriage was Mercer, and prepared the paperwork to get a new ID. On Wednesday, Darcy called. Paul, I wanted to check in about Friday. What time should we be there? Nodder, let's make it 6, I answered. Great. And I was wondering, have you decided how much money you're willing to help us with? For planning, you know. Her chutzpah was astonishing. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she was only interested in money. Darcy, let's discuss it on Friday. It'll depend on the price I get for the house. Sure. Ethan and I are just so excited. We've already started looking at houses we might buy. There's a great one in Sherman Oaks. 3 bedrooms, pool. I listened to her making plans for money she hadn't gotten yet, from selling a house she didn't own, and felt a cold resolve grow inside. I had made the right choice. Friday afternoon, I got a call from the realtor. Mr. Baxter, we have a buyer. A young family ready to pay the asking price in cash and close within a week. Great, I said. Get the paperwork done. Are you sure? Maybe we could get more if we waited a little longer. I'm sure. By Friday night, I was ready. I cooked dinner. Elaine's roast, Darcy's favorite. I opened the good wine I'd bought for Elaine's 40th wedding anniversary, which I was saving for a special occasion. I set the table with the best dishes. They arrived at 6 sharp. Darcy was wearing a new dress with a price tag I could only imagine. Ethan looked tense but enthusiastic. It smells amazing," Darcy exclaimed as she entered the house. "I've missed your roast so much, Paul." We sat down at the table and I poured the wine. "To new beginnings," I proposed a toast. "To new beginnings," Darcy said enthusiastically. Ethan raised his glass silently, avoiding my gaze. Deep down, he must have felt guilty about what he was about to do. Dinner began relatively quietly. We discussed the weather, the latest news, minor events, but I could see Darcy constantly glancing at her watch. She was impatient to get to the main topic. So Paul," she said when we were finished with the main course, "you promised to tell me about your plans to sell the house." I blotted my lips with my napkin and took a sip of wine. "Yes, of course. I put the house on the market 3 days ago. There's already a buyer ready to close the deal within the week." Darcy choked on her wine. "That fast? But we haven't even discussed a sales strategy. I'm sure we could get a lot more if... I'll get 1,100,000. I'm fine with that." 1,100,000, Darcy exclaimed. "But the houses in this neighborhood are worth at least 1,300,000. Who's your realtor? He's obviously not competent." "Darcy," Ethan said warningly, but she couldn't stop. "You're losing at least 200,000. This is insane. We have to cancel this deal immediately and find a realtor." I calmly sipped more wine. "The deal's in the process of being finalized, Darcy. The papers have been signed." "Without our knowledge?" She raised her voice. "Ethan, say something. Your father is giving away money that could be ours." "Dad, maybe you really should have consulted us," Ethan said uncertainly. "After all, it concerns our future." "Your future?" I raised an eyebrow. "As far as I remember, this is my home." "But you said you wanted to help us with our debts," Ethan exclaimed. "And now you're selling the house for nothing." "I will, but not with all the money from the sale." "How much?" Darcy asked bluntly. "How much are you willing to give us?" 50,000, I said, the amount I decided on before they arrived. Darcy laughed. 50,000? With debts like ours? That won't even pay off our credit cards." "Then I suggest you be more prudent with your spending," I said calmly. Darcy pushed her plate away. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Is this some kind of revenge for us asking you to move in?" "Darcy," Ethan tried to stop her again. "No, I want to know." She turned to me. "We're trying to help you find a better place to live at your age. And you're acting like a whimsical child." I didn't say a word as I watched her get more and more agitated. "You think you're going to live forever? That you'll be able to take care of this huge house for another 20 years? Sooner or later you'll need help, and then who will be there for you? Us, your family, the only people who care about you." "Darcy, stop it." Ethan grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. "No, let him know." Her voice was breaking into a scream. "We could get a decent house with the money we get, start a new life, pay off our debts, maybe even have a baby. Your house is worth 1,300,000 at least, and you're going to give us a measly 50,000 after all we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me, Darcy?" I asked quietly. "We visit you every week. I cook for you. I clean this dusty house. We found you great senior housing options. We worry about you, and you." She suddenly stopped, realizing she had said too much. Ethan sat with his head down, his cheeks burning with shame. "Keep going, Darcy," I said calmly. "Don't stop." Her eyes narrowed. She straightened in her chair, dropping the pretense. "You know what? Screw all these games. I'll be blunt. You're a selfish old man clinging to the past. This house is too big for you. It's wasting away when it could be helping a young family start a life. You can't even keep it in order. Look at this outdated wallpaper, this furniture from the last century." I listened to her tirade in silence. Darcy, seeing that I wasn't responding, became more and more aggressive. "Nama, do you have any idea what we've been through this past year? Ethan's working overtime. I'm trying to get the business up and running. We're barely making ends meet, and you're sitting here in your big house full of money, refusing to help your own son." "Darcy, please," Ethan begged. "Dad, that's not what she meant." "No, that's exactly what she meant." She slammed her fist on the table, causing the dishes to bounce. I'm tired of pretending. You're living in the past, Paul. Your wife died 5 years ago. It's time to move on. This house is just a building, bricks and wood, and we need the money now. She jumped to her feet, her face contorted with anger. This house will be mine now, she shouted, pointing her finger at me. No more games. Either you sell it at a fair price and share the money, or we'll find a way to prove that you can't take care of yourself. How does that sound? There was a deafening silence in the room. Ethan looked at his wife with horror and something akin to an epiphany, as if he were seeing her true nature for the first time. Darcy was breathing heavily, her hands shaking with rage. I slowly set my glass on the table and looked at her. Instead of the anger she expected, I felt a strange calmness, like the last piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Okay, I said quietly. Come back in a week, and I'll sign everything. Darcy froze with her mouth open. She'd expected a scandal, resistance, anything, but not this calm agreement. What? She whispered. You're right, Darcy. I've been clinging to the past for too long. A house is just a building. I glanced at Elaine's picture on the wall. It's the people and the memories we carry in our hearts that matter. Really? She lowered herself back into the chair uncertainly. Of course, I smiled. The sale is already in process. When the deal closes, I'll transfer all the money into a joint account. You and Ethan can dispose of it as you see fit. All the money? Her eyes widened. Every last dime. Dad, are you sure? Ethan asked. What about you? I'll manage, son. I have a small savings. It will be enough for a modest life. Darcy could no longer hide a triumphant smile. That's, very generous of you, Paul. Come back next Friday, I said. By then, the deal will be closed, and we'll be able to finalize the paperwork. Friday, Darcy nodded. We'll definitely be there. The rest of the evening passed in a strange atmosphere. Darcy was enthusiastic and couldn't stop talking about plans for the future. A new house, vacations, investments in her business. Ethan looked confused and depressed, not participating in her fantasies. When they finally left, I stood on the doorstep for a long time, watching the lights of their car go by. Then I went back into the house, pulled an old suitcase out of the closet, and started packing the essentials. Saturday morning, I met with the realtor and signed all the paperwork to sell the house. The deal was to close on Thursday, the day before my appointment with Ethan and Darcy. Then I drove to the bank where Quentin was waiting for me. We transferred the money from the sale of the house to a new account in Paul Mercer's name. From there, I withdrew a substantial amount of cash, enough to start a new life. Are you sure you want to do that? Quentin asked me as we left the bank. Absolutely, I replied. They thought they could manipulate me, control my life, but I won't let them take away my dignity. On Sunday, I visited the cemetery where Elaine is buried. I stood at her grave for a long time, telling her my plan. Forgive me, my love, I whispered. I know you wanted me to look after Ethan, but sometimes the best lesson is to let people face the consequences of their actions. On Monday, I began methodically packing my personal belongings. Photos, letters, small mementos related to important moments in Elaine's and my life. I left most of the furniture and household items behind. They had no special meaning to me and would only complicate my escape. On Tuesday, I met with Howard and signed a new will in which most of my assets went to the local hospital where Elaine worked and a small amount to Ethan, but only on the condition that he take a financial literacy course. Is that really necessary? Howard asked, looking at the document. Yes. If they think I just disappeared with all the money, it will teach them a lesson. If something happens to me, the hospital gets the funds and Ethan gets a chance to turn his life around. But on my terms, not Darcy's. On Wednesday, I made the final preparations. I arranged a long-term lease on a small cottage in a coastal town 300 kilometers from Los Angeles. No one knew me there, and I could start fresh. On Thursday, the deal closed. The new owners were supposed to move in on Saturday. I handed them the keys through the realtor, leaving a note wishing them happiness in their new home. In the evening, I sat in my chair on the veranda for the last time. 40 years I've lived in this house. Here Ethan was born. Here Elaine and I grew old together. Here she died. I thought I would grieve, but instead I felt a strange release. The house was just a building. The memories would stay with me wherever I went. I went to bed early, But I couldn't sleep for a long time. Not from doubt. The decision had been made, and I wasn't going to back down. It was the thought of Ethan that bothered me. Would this lesson change him? Or would he forever be controlled by the likes of Darcy? Friday morning, I got up at the crack of dawn, packed the last of my belongings, and walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to each room. Then I loaded the suitcases into the car and drove away without looking back. I knew Darcy and Ethan would arrive in the evening, expecting to get the papers signed and access to the money from the sale of the house. Instead, they would find an empty house with new owners and no clue where Paul Baxter had disappeared to. This was my revenge. Not vicious, not cruel, but effective. I was robbing them of what they had so greedily counted on and giving them a lesson that might make them rethink their lives. As I pulled onto the highway leading north, I felt a heavy weight fall from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I was free. From manipulation, from expectations, from the past. There was uncertainty ahead, but also the opportunity to live the remaining years on my own terms. "Goodbye, Ethan," I whispered, looking at Los Angeles receding in the rearview mirror. "I hope someday you'll understand." My plan wasn't just an escape. It was a strategic operation that required meticulous planning and flawless execution. After talking to Quentin and Howard at the coffee shop, I sprang into action without delay. The first thing I did was contact the realtor Howard had recommended, Cindy Caulfield, a woman in her 50s with a keen eye and a reputation for keeping her mouth shut. We met not in her office, but in a small park near my home. "Mr. Baxter, I understand your situation," she said, listening carefully. "This kind of family are more common than you might think, especially when it comes to valuable real estate. I need a quick sale, Cindy. Cash, minimal paperwork. A buyer willing to close within a week." Cindy tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notepad. "It's possible, but it would require a concession in price. Your house is worth about $1,300,000 at current market prices. For a quick cash sale, you'd have to drop the price to at least $1,100,000. I nodded. "Sidibram. That's fine with me. There's one more thing," Cindy lowered her voice. "Is what you're doing legal? I mean, are there no other owners, spouse, children with rights to the property?" "I own the house outright," I answered firmly. "My wife died 5 years ago, and I'm the sole owner. Howard can provide all the necessary documents." Cindy nodded. "Then let's get started. I have several potential buyers who are looking for just such a house and have the cash. I will contact them today." We agreed on a commission, and I signed all the necessary paperwork right there in the park. Cindy then took some photos of the house from the outside. She already had the rest of the photos, including the interiors, from my previous consultations about a possible sale a year ago. While Cindy was busy finding a buyer, I met with Quentin at his home in Pasadena. Quentin, unlike me, had always been a man of the system. 35 years in banking, the last 15 of which he had held a senior position in the large private client department. He retired 3 years ago, but has retained his connections and, more importantly, his knowledge of how the financial system works. "Paul, what you're asking requires caution," he said as we sat in his home office. "Technically, it's not illegal. You just change your name and open a new account. But if it's done to avoid debt or lawsuits, I have no debts, Quentin, and there are no lawsuits against me. I just want to start a new life without leaving a trace for my, former family." Quentin sighed. "Okay, we can use your mother's maiden name, Mercer, right? You'll need a name change certificate for a new ID. I know someone at the county courthouse who can expedite the process without too many questions. Then we'll open a new bank account in another state, like Oregon. I will help with the transfer of funds in a way that minimizes the trail." "How long will this take?" "A few days for basic paperwork. A full-fledged new ID is a couple weeks. But we can start with temporary documents." "I have a week, Quentin. No more." He nodded. "Then we'll start now." The next few days turned into a series of meetings, calls, and trips. Cindy found a buyer, a young family from San Francisco moving to Los Angeles for work. They had cash equity from the sale of their previous home and were willing to close the deal quickly if I agreed to a price of $1,100,000. "They fell in love with your house from the pictures," Cindy said. "They were especially impressed with the handcrafted woodwork and the garden. They were willing to skip even a full tour of the house, which is rare. I agreed to their offer, and we started the paperwork. Usually these deals take weeks, but Cindy and Howard worked nonstop, using their connections and experience to speed up the process. By Wednesday, we were ready to sign the final documents. At the same time, Quentin arranged for me to meet with a retired judge he knew who helped me file the name change paperwork. This was done without publicity, through an expedited procedure available in special cases. By Thursday, I had in my hands temporary documents in Paul Mercer's name, including a driver's license and basic identification. That was enough to open a bank account at a national bank branch in San Diego, where Quentin and I drove down that same day. Remember, these documents are real but temporary, Quentin warned me. The full set of documents will be ready in 2 weeks. I'll send them to the address you give me as soon as you get settled. While the paperwork was being processed and the house was being sold, I started liquidating my assets. I had investments in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, savings life insurance, and several retirement accounts. I couldn't close them all at once without attracting attention, so I proceeded in stages, transferring funds to various intermediate accounts before they finally went into my new account in Paul Mercer's name. It's like money laundering, I joked one day as Quentin and I sat over the transfer scheme. Quentin didn't smile. Technically, it's not, since the money is legal and you pay all the taxes. But yes, the methodology is similar. That's why we have to be extremely careful. On Friday, the day before my planned disappearance, I met with the buyers of the house, Jason and Laura Patterson. They looked like a nice couple of about 35, with 2 small children they had left with their grandmother for the trip. Mr. Baxter, we are so grateful for the opportunity to buy your house, Laura said as she shook my hand. It's exactly as we dreamed it would be. Did you build it yourself? Jason asked, admiring the woodwork in the living room. Yes, almost 40 years ago, I said. Every board, every nail, I hammered in with my own hands. That's amazing, Jason shook his head. You don't see that kind of workmanship much anymore. We promise we'll keep your house safe. I felt a lump in my throat. They were sincere, and it soothed my pain of parting with the house a little. At least it would fall into good hands instead of being immediately sold by Darcy and Ethan for a quick profit. We signed all the papers at Howard's office. The money was transferred to a temporary account, from which it was then to go into my new Paul Mercer account. The Pattersons got the keys but agreed not to move in until Saturday night, giving me time to pack up the rest of my belongings. We weren't planning to move in until the weekend anyway, Laura explained. The children needed time to adjust to the idea of a new home. When the formalities were completed and the Pattersons had left, Howard shook my hand. Are you sure you want to go all the way? He asked. There are other ways to deal with your son and daughter-in-law. I've tried every other way, Howard. This is the only way. I can't let them manipulate me, demand, threaten. I'd rather disappear from their radar and live out my remaining years in peace. Howard nodded. I respect your decision. Just take care of yourself. That night I went back to the house that technically didn't belong to me anymore. It's a strange feeling to sleep within the walls you built, knowing it's your last night. I hardly slept at all, instead wandering through the rooms, touching the walls, remembering moments associated with each corner. Saturday morning, the day of my planned disappearance, I got up early. I gathered the last of my personal belongings, photos, letters, a few memorabilia. It all fit into 2 suitcases and a backpack. The rest, furniture, appliances, most of my clothes, I was leaving to new owners or giving to charity through a company that was scheduled to pick things up on Monday. I decided that before I finally left, I needed to say goodbye not only to the house, but to places that were important to Elaine and me. I put together a little itinerary of the significant points in our lives in Los Angeles. The first point was Mario's restaurant in Santa Monica, where Elaine and I celebrated every wedding anniversary. The restaurant had changed, a new sign, a different interior, a menu I barely recognized. But the table in the corner where we always sat was still there. I ordered coffee and sat there for almost an hour, remembering our conversations, her laughter, the way the light fell on her face. Then I drove to Griffith Park, where we like to walk on weekends. Climbed up to our favorite observation deck that overlooked the entire city. It was a clear day and Los Angeles spread out before me like a palm, glittering, huge, full of life and opportunity. This city had once seemed full of promise. Now it was a cage from which I was finally breaking free. Goodbye, old friend, I whispered, looking at the horizon. It was interesting. The next stop was Cedars, Sinai Hospital, where Elaine spent the last weeks of her life. I didn't go inside, just sat in the car in the parking lot, remembering those hard days. Strangely enough, instead of pain, I felt gratitude for the time we spent together, for the love we shared, for all she gave me. The last stop on my itinerary was Forest Lawn Cemetery, where Elaine is buried. I brought a bouquet of her favorite lilies and sat at the headstone for a long time, telling her my plans as if she might hear. "I know you were worried about Ethan," I said softly. "I tried, Elaine. I really tried. But he chose his path, and I have to choose mine. I'm sorry if I let you down." The wind rustled in the leaves of the trees, and for a moment I thought it was Elaine answering me, telling me everything would be okay. As I walked back to the car, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the load I had been carrying all these years had gotten a little lighter. I was ready to move on. I spent the last hours before I left finalizing my preparations. I wrote a letter to Howard with instructions on how to proceed if Ethan and Darcy went to the police to report me missing. I addressed the other letter to Ethan, but I didn't plan to send it now. Howard was to keep it and pass it along only in case of special circumstances, like if something happened to me. I also prepared a short note to the Pattersons, the new owners of the house. "Dear Jason and Laura, thank you for loving this house as much as my wife and I once did. It was built with love and care, and I hope it brings your family as much happiness as it has brought us." In the basement, behind a panel near the boiler, there is a small hiding place. There you will find a scrapbook with pictures of the construction of the house and some of the tools I used to build it. They're yours now. Use them with the same love with which I built this house. Best wishes, Paul Baxter. I put the note on the kitchen table, knowing they would find it when they moved in later that evening. It was almost noon when I walked around the house one last time. I touched the walls, ran my hand along the wooden railing I'd carved myself, looked at the sunspots on the living room floor. 40 years of memories encased within those walls. But I knew that the most important memories would stay with me wherever I went. I took out my suitcases and backpack and loaded them into the trunk of my old Ford. I planned to sell the car as soon as I got to my destination. It was too recognizable, and Ethan might try to track me by it, but it was necessary for the first time. Before I got behind the wheel, I took one last look at the house. On the porch, I suddenly thought I saw Elaine. Young, beautiful, just as she'd been when we'd first moved here. She was smiling and waving as if to say, "Go on. It'll be okay." I blinked and the vision vanished, but the feeling of peacefulness remained. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove out into the street without looking back. My past was behind me, the future waited ahead. The plan was for me to go to San Diego first, to pick up the full packet of papers Quentin had prepared. Then north to the small coastal town of Carmel, where I had rented a small cottage in the name of Paul Mercer. It was far enough away from Los Angeles to minimize the chances of a chance encounter with someone I knew, but still in California, a state I loved and considered home. Pulling onto the freeway, I turned on the radio. An old song that Elaine and I loved was playing. I smiled and picked up the speed. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. A few hours later, I was already in San Diego. Quentin was waiting for me at a small motel on the outskirts of town, where he had reserved a room in Paul Mercer's name. "All set," he said, handing me an envelope of papers. "Driver's license, social security, credit cards, and a new name. All real, legit, just under a different name. Bank account activated, money from the sale of the house transferred. Here's the debit card and checkbook." I took the envelope, feeling its weight, not physical but symbolic. In it was my new identity, my new life. "Thank you, Quentin, for everything." "You're welcome, old friend," he patted my shoulder. "Just be careful, and let me know when you're settled in." "I will." We hugged goodbye and I got back in the car. Carmel was still hours away and I wanted to get there before dark. As I drove out of San Diego, my phone rang. Ethan's name popped up on the screen. I knew he and Darcy had to be at my house right now, having discovered that it was sold and I was gone. This was the moment my revenge was accomplished. I stared at the ringing phone for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to answer it, to hear Ethan's reaction, maybe even explain to him why I'd done what I'd done. But I knew that would be a mistake. A clean break was what was needed. I dropped the call and turned the phone off, then rolled down the window and tossed it to the side of the highway. a symbolic gesture ending my former life. I was now Paul Mercer, a 67-year-old widower moving to Carmel to start a new, quiet life by the ocean. Paul Baxter was a thing of the past, along with his house, his son, and his pain. I turned the radio up louder and pressed on the gas. There was a road ahead, and I was ready for the journey. I hadn't seen Darcy and Ethan's reaction when they arrived at the empty house with new owners, but I could imagine it. Quentin, who had kept in touch with Howard, filled me in on the details a couple weeks later when I was already settled in Carmel. It was Friday night, 6 o'clock sharp. Darcy was always punctual, especially when it came to money. She parked her shiny silver Lexus in the driveway, not even bothering to notice that an unfamiliar minivan was already in the driveway. Ethan followed her, glancing around nervously, probably already sensing something was wrong. Darcy knocked on the door, not in the usual way one knocked when coming to visit, but confidently and imperiously, as if she already considered this house her own. Laura Patterson opened the door, holding a little girl about 3 years old. "Hello, can I help you?" Laura asked, looking at the unexpected guest with surprise. Darcy was confused for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. "Good evening. We're looking for Paul Baxter. This is his house." Laura shook her head. "You've made a mistake. This is our house. We bought it from Mr. Baxter last week." Darcy laughed. A short, nervous laugh. "Is this some kind of joke? We arranged to meet Paul tonight. He was going to sign the papers." "Jason!" Laura called out. "Could you come here, please?" Jason Patterson came to the door, wiping his hands with a towel. "What's the matter, dear?" "These people are looking for the previous owner," Laura explained. "Look!" Darcy was beginning to lose patience. "I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but this house belongs to my father-in-law, Paul Baxter. We agreed to meet with him today." "Ma'am," Jason said quietly, "we bought this house from Mr. Baxter. The deal is closed, and all the papers are signed. We moved in this afternoon." "That's impossible," Ethan interjected, his voice shaking. "There must be some misunderstanding. Can we talk to my father?" "Mr. Baxter isn't here," Jason answered. "He gave us the keys yesterday and said he was leaving. We don't know where he's going." Darcy turned pale. She gripped the door jamb as if looking for a foothold. "No, no, 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 no. This can't be happening. He promised. He said he'd sign the papers, that he'd give us the money." "Darcy, calm down." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. "Don't tell me to calm down." "Arr," she shouted, her face contorted with anger. "He tricked us. Your father, the bloody cunning old man, tricked us." The little girl in Laura's arms began to cry, frightened by the screams. "Please don't scream," Laura said sternly. "You're scaring my baby." "I don't care about your baby." Darcy was no longer in control of herself. "I want to know what happened to my money. Where is Paul? Where did he go?" "Ma'am, if you don't calm down, we're going to call the police," Jason warned, his voice hardening. "Call them." Darcy stepped forward, trying to enter the house. "Let them look into this fraud." Jason blocked the passage with his body. "I will not allow you to enter my house. Please leave." "Your house? Your house?" Darcy practically squealed. "This house was supposed to be my house." Ethan finally took control of the situation. He put his arm around his wife's shoulders and pulled her away from the door. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said to the Pattersons. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. We're leaving." "I'm sorry," Laura said softly. "But Mr. Baxter really did sell us this house. We have all the documents to prove it." "I understand," Ethan nodded. "Thank you." He practically forced a hysterical Darcy into the car and slammed the door shut. The last thing the Pattersons heard was, "I'll kill him! I swear I'll find him and kill him." Quentin learned all of this from Howard, whom the Pattersons called immediately after the incident, concerned about the strange visitors. Howard reassured them, explaining that I really had every right to sell the house and that they would have no legal problems. The events of the next few days unfolded rapidly. Ethan and Darcy immediately went to the police to report my disappearance. However, the police quickly determined that no crime had been committed. I had sold my own house, received the money for it, and left for an unknown destination. There was no sign of violence or coercion. An adult has every right to disappear if he wishes. That didn't stop Darcy. She was sure I had hidden the money somewhere she could get to it. They hired a private investigator, Ray Donovan, an ex-cop with a reputation for always finding what he was looking for. Donovan started by checking airports, bus, and train stations. He reviewed surveillance footage, interviewed neighbors, checked my credit cards and bank accounts. He found that I had cashed out a substantial amount of money the day before I disappeared, but the trail went cold from there. He didn't know about Quentin or the Paul Mercer account. To anyone watching, I just vanished into thin air along with the money from the house sale. Darcy wasn't giving up. She and Ethan came to Howard's house demanding information on my whereabouts. "I don't know where Paul is," Howard answered honestly. "He didn't tell me where he was going." "I don't believe it," Darcy shouted. "You're his lawyer, you must know." "Mr. Baxter was my client, and we had a relationship of trust," Howard replied calmly. "But he didn't have to tell me his plans. I helped him sell the house, and that was the end of my involvement." "He had deceived us," Darcy continued to rage. "He promised to give us the money, and then he disappeared. Sonoran onanuum. As far as I know, Mr. Baxter never signed any legally binding documents to give you the money," Howard countered. "If you have a written agreement, I'd be glad to consider it." Of course, there was no agreement, only my verbal promise, made when I was already planning my disappearance. Ethan was broken. He couldn't believe his father had taken such a step. Deep down, he probably understood the motives, but it was too painful to admit his part in what had happened. "Papa would never do such a thing without a reason," he told Darcy. "We must have done something to make him take such extreme measures." "Oh, shut up," Darcy snapped at him. "Your father is a petty, vindictive old man who chose to punish us for wanting a better life. He's always controlled you, always thought he knew best." Their relationship was deteriorating rapidly. Without the expected money from the sale of the house, they could not pay off their debts, which by then had reached critical mass. Creditors were mounting pressure, threatening lawsuits and foreclosures. 3 weeks after I disappeared, the bank sent them an eviction notice for non-payment. Darcy tried to find money from friends and distant relatives, but no one was willing to lend money to a couple with so much debt. "We could sell the car," Ethan suggested when they got the last notice from the bank. "My car? Are you kidding me?" Darcy looked at him like he was crazy. "It's the only thing I have left." "We don't have a choice, Darcy. We have no money to pay our rent, no money to pay our loans. We're on the verge of bankruptcy." "And whose fault is that?" she hissed. "If you had better control over your father, we'd be living in his house right now, or have the money from selling it. But no, you let him walk away and take everything." "My fault?" Ethan finally started to defend himself. "You're the one who yelled at him, demanded the house, threatened him. You're the one who spent money we didn't have on designer rags and useless cosmetics." "Don't you dare blame me." Darcy threw a vase at him, which shattered against the wall. "Your father hated me from the beginning, never gave us a chance, always looking down on us, judging us." Their fight went on for hours, going from room to room, getting louder and more violent. The neighbors called the police because of the noise, but by the time the patrol arrived, Ethan had already left, slamming the door. He didn't return until 2 days later, wrinkled, unshaven, and smelling of cheap whiskey. Darcy had sold almost all of their furniture and expensive clothes by then, but the money wasn't enough. "We're going to have to declare bankruptcy," Ethan said, looking at the half-empty apartment. "There's no other way out." Darcy sat on the floor among the boxes of things she was trying to sort through. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was in a sloppy ponytail, her makeup absent, and dark circles under her eyes. "I talked to the lawyer," she said without looking at Ethan. "He thinks we have a chance to contest the sale of your father's house." "On what grounds?" Ethan asked tiredly. "The house was his. He had every right to sell it. We could argue that he was incapacitated, or that we invested in its upkeep, counting on the inheritance." "That is not true, Darcy. We never invested in his house, and he was perfectly competent. No court would accept such a claim." "Then we'll find him and make him return the money." "How?" "The private investigator you hired found nothing. The police refused to open a case. Daddy's gone, and it looks like he's gone for good." Darcy looked at her husband with fury. "You're not even trying. It's your father, your money, and you're just giving up." "Because I understand why he did it," Ethan said quietly. "We deserved it, Darcy. We tried to take away the house he built with his own hands. the house where he lived with my mom, where he raised me. We told him he was old and infirm, that he should be in a nursing home. We lied to him, manipulated him, demanded money. All for what? To buy things we couldn't afford? Darcy laughed, bitterly, mirthlessly. That's it. You're on his side. You always have been. I should have realized that before. I'm not on anyone's side, Darcy. I just see the truth. We were wrong. Wrong? She jumped to her feet, her eyes burning with rage. Wrong about wanting a better life? That we wanted a house instead of this crappy apartment? That you wanted to start a business instead of living in an office until you were old? Wrong about the way they tried to achieve it, Ethan answered. At the expense of others, at my father's expense. Darcy gave him a long look, then shook her head. You're hopeless, as weak as ever. I'm surprised I didn't notice it before. She went to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. What are you doing? Ethan asked. Leaving, Darcy replied, starting to put her things away. I'm not going to drown with you. You're leaving? Where? None of your business. Maybe to my parents. Maybe to a friend's. Just away from you and your guilt. Ethan didn't try to stop her. He sat on the couch and watched her pack, methodical and determined, as if she were erasing the last few years from her life. When she finished packing her suitcase, she removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table. Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you and your father are happy in your righteousness. She walked out without looking back, leaving Ethan alone in a half-empty apartment with a mountain of debt and the realization of the complete collapse of his entire life. A week after Darcy left, Ethan did declare bankruptcy. He had to move out of the apartment and sell the last of his possessions to pay off his most persistent creditors. He found a tiny room in a house with a shared kitchen and bathroom and took a second job at night, trying to get back on his feet. Darcy filed for divorce, claiming half of all assets, but given his bankruptcy, there was nothing to divide. Their marriage ended as quickly and dramatically as it had begun. Ethan tried several times to find me through old friends and acquaintances. He even traveled to Sedona, where Elaine and I had once enjoyed vacationing, thinking I might have gone there. But I was careful and left no trace. To anyone looking for me, I simply disappeared, vanished into thin air along with the money from the sale of the house. Private investigator Ray Donovan was still periodically checking out various leads, but without much enthusiasm. He was experienced enough to realize, if a person really wants to disappear and has the means to do so, it's almost impossible to find him, especially if he doesn't make mistakes, doesn't use old contacts, and doesn't revert to old habits. And I was careful, very careful. One day, Donovan came dangerously close to figuring it out. He somehow got to Quentin and started asking questions about my relationship with him and his possible role in my disappearance. But Quentin wasn't just my friend. He was a professional who had devoted decades to handling the financial secrets of wealthy clients. He knew how to keep secrets. Paul was my friend, he answered the detective. We saw each other about once a month over lunch or a round of golf. But he never talked about problems with his son or daughter-in-law, and certainly never shared plans to disappear. Donovan didn't believe it, but he couldn't prove anything. Quentin was impeccable. No suspicious financial transactions, no unexplained meetings, no clues. 2 months after my disappearance, Darcy stopped paying the detective. Her own life was falling apart, and she no longer had the money or the will to keep looking. The last I heard from Quentin, she'd moved back to Seattle to live with her parents, gotten a job as a clerk in a cosmetics store, and was trying to forget about her failed marriage and her failed career as a cosmetics mogul. Ethan was gradually getting out of debt. He worked 2 jobs, saved on everything, and slowly, step by step, restored his financial situation. According to Howard, who sometimes received news from him, Ethan had changed a lot. He became more responsible, more independent, stopped looking for easy ways. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been too cruel to my son. But then I remembered how he'd sat silent, eyes downcast, while Darcy demanded my house, threatened, screamed. How he'd let her manipulate me, knowing it hurt me. How he chose her side over mine. No, I didn't feel guilty. I did what I had to do to keep my dignity and teach a lesson. Cruel, perhaps, but necessary. 6 months after I disappeared, Ethan finally stopped looking. He accepted the fact that his father was gone forever, taking with him the money that could have changed his life. He may have even begun to understand why I did it. And I watched it all from afar, from a quiet coastal town where no one knew Paul Baxter, a construction worker from Los Angeles with a troubled son and a greedy daughter. In law. Here they knew only Paul Mercer, a quiet elderly gentleman who had recently moved away to spend the rest of his life listening to the sound of the ocean. And I have to admit, I like this new life much better than the old one. Carmel by the sea greeted me with a misty morning and the sound of the surf. When I first came here, I knew right away this was where I wanted to spend the rest of my days. The small coastal town of about 4,000 people, located on the Monterey Peninsula, reminded me of Europe. Stone cottages buried in greenery, narrow streets, art galleries, and tiny cafes. I rented a small cottage 2 blocks from the ocean, a one-story cottage with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and most importantly, a spacious veranda overlooking a tiny but cozy garden. The house was old with chipped paint and creaky floorboards, but that was its charm. There was a sense of history here, of a life lived before me. I spent the first few weeks settling in and familiarizing myself with the city, walking along the coast, watching pelicans and seagulls, visiting local stores and cafes, gradually becoming a part of this place. No one knew my story. No one asked me any questions. To my neighbors, I was just Paul Mercer, a retired widower who moved from the Midwest to be closer to the ocean. You should see the winters in Minnesota, I said with a smile when someone asked why I'd moved. After 65, you start to appreciate places where you don't have to dig your car out of a snowdrift every morning. They laughed and nodded, accepting the story without question. People hear what they expect to hear, see what they are ready to see. An elderly man escaping the cold winters was a far more believable story than a man disappearing from his own family with money from the sale of his house. I soon started a small vegetable garden behind the house. Nothing fancy, just a few beds of herbs and vegetables. Working with the land always calmed me, and growing my own food was practical and enjoyable. In the mornings, I would wake up at dawn, have a cup of coffee on the veranda listening to the birds and the sound of the surf in the distance, then work in the garden or do chores. Quentin helped me convert some of my money into long-term investments with a small but steady income. It was enough for a modest, no-frills life, but with the comforts I valued: fresh produce, good books, the occasional dinner at a local restaurant. I didn't buy a new car, preferring a used pickup truck that didn't attract attention, but was reliable enough for my needs. About a month after moving in, I realized that I missed working with my hands. All my life I had been building something, creating something, and the habit was too strong to give up. In the garage of my rented cottage, I set up a small carpentry workshop. Nothing fancy, a workbench, a few basic tools I bought at the local hardware store, but it was enough to get me started. I started small, fixing broken chairs, restoring old furniture that I found at sales or thrift stores. Gradually, I moved on to creating simple objects: cutting boards, shelves, picture frames. Working with wood calmed me down, allowed me to immerse myself in the process and forget about everything else. One morning, I was working on a small mahogany box in the open garage when I heard a voice say, "Beautiful work." I looked up and saw a woman standing at the entrance to the garage. She looked to be in her mid-60s with short gray hair and shrewd blue eyes. She was leaning on a cane, but she was straight and confident. "Thank you," I said, setting the sandpaper aside. "What can I do for you?" "Susum, nothing. I was just passing by and noticed your work." "It's not often you meet a real craftsman these days," she smiled. "I'm Marilyn Hawthorne. I live 2 streets over." "Paul Mercer." I wiped my hands with a rag and held out my palm to her. "Nice to meet you." We shook hands and I noticed the calluses on her fingers. Signs of physical labor? Unusual for a woman of her age and social standing, judging by her well-dressed and well-groomed appearance. "Do you work with your hands too?" I asked, nodding at her palms. Marilyn laughed. "Pottery. 30 years at the potter's wheel leaves its marks." She showed me her hands. "I used to have a studio in Berkeley. Now it's just a little studio at home for the soul." We got to talking. Turns out Marilyn had been living in Carmel for 10 years, having moved here after her divorce. She taught art at the local public school and worked part-time selling her pottery at the weekly farmers market. "You have to come to the market on Saturday," she said. "All the locals gather there. Farmers, artisans, musicians. Best way to get to know the community. Maybe I'll stop by, I replied. Not sure I was ready for that kind of social interaction. Come by my counter and I'll treat you to the best apple cider around. She smiled again. And if you're going to sell your woodwork, I can help you decorate the place. After she left, I wondered. For the last few months, I had been focused on escaping, on creating a new identity, on leaving no trace. But now that the basic work was done, the question was how to move on, what to do with the remaining years. On Saturday, I went to the farmer's market. It was in a small square in the center of town. A few dozen stalls of farm produce, handmade goods, prepared food, live music, laughter, conversation. The atmosphere was warm and friendly. I found Marilyn's counter without difficulty. Her pottery stood out. Simple shapes, natural colors, but with a kind of special elegance that is hard to describe in words. She spotted me and waved. "You've come," she rejoiced, as I promised, the best apple cider around. She poured me a glass from a thermos, and I have to admit, the cider was indeed excellent. "You do amazing things," I said as I looked at her work. I especially like the series of small cups with the wave-like texture. "Thank you," she smiled. "It's my new collection, inspired by the ocean. Did you bring any of your own work?" I shook my head. "Next time, maybe. You should do that. They love handmade work here, especially by local artisans." We talked all afternoon. Marilyn introduced me to several of her friends, a farmer who grows organic vegetables, a couple who make cheese, an elderly artist who paints seascapes. They were all friendly but not intrusive, the perfect combination for someone like me who values solitude but doesn't want complete isolation. In the weeks that followed, I began to visit the farmer's market on a regular basis. At first just as a customer, then with a small selection of their wood products. To my surprise, they were in demand. Particularly popular were cutting boards inlaid with different types of wood and small jewelry boxes. Marilyn and I began to see each other more often. Sometimes she would stop by to show me a new glazing technique, or just to have a cup of tea on the veranda. Sometimes I visited her studio, marveling at the way her hands transformed a simple piece of clay into a work of art. We talked about art, about nature, about books we'd read, movies we'd seen. Never about the past, not her divorce, not my former life. It wasn't a romantic connection, more like a deep friendship based on mutual respect and common interests. We had both gone through losses, both started new lives in adulthood, both found solace in working with our hands and in the beauty of nature around us. One evening, as we sat on my veranda watching the sunset, Marilyn suddenly asked, "Do you ever miss your old life, Paul?" I tensed up. In all the time we'd known each other, we'd never touched on such topics. "Sometimes," I answered cautiously. "Do you?" She looked wistfully at the horizon, where the sun was slowly sinking into the ocean. "I used to miss it. The house my husband and I built, the friends who stayed in Berkeley, the familiar life. But then I realized that clinging to the past is like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it flows away." I nodded, understanding her metaphor. "Sometimes you have to let go in order to move on." "Exactly," she smiled. "You know, there's a point in pottery when you have to stop working with the clay. If you keep kneading and shaping it for too long, it loses its malleability, becomes stiff and breaks. You have to be able to stop and let it take shape." "It's a similar principle in woodworking," I replied. "Sometimes you just have to follow the fibers instead of trying to make the wood be something it is not." We fell silent, enjoying a moment of understanding that didn't require words. A month after that conversation, I received a letter from Quentin. He wrote rarely and always through an intermediary, a post office box in San Diego, from which the letters were forwarded to my present residence. It was a precaution we had agreed upon early on. In the letter, he would give updates on my son and former daughter-in-law. The divorce was finalized. Ethan was slowly getting out of debt while working 2 jobs. Darcy had returned to Seattle and was rumored to be dating a local businessman. "Your son has changed, Paul," Quentin wrote. "Howard saw him recently. Says he's more serious, more mature. Perhaps the experience has been good for him. He asked about you, wanted to know if Howard had heard anything. He seemed genuinely concerned." I set the letter aside with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to contact Ethan, to tell him I was okay, but the other part realized that would be a mistake. My disappearance had to remain final for the lesson to be learned. Half measures would only create more problems. That evening, I worked long hours in the workshop, creating a small box made of maple with a dark walnut inlay. On the lid, I carved a stylized image of a wave, a symbol of change, movement, eternal renewal. This box was a way for me to let go of the past, to recognize that life goes on, no matter what. When I finished the work, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about the house in Los Angeles with pain or regret. It was part of my story, but no longer defined me. In the months that followed, my life in Carmel took on a pleasant rhythm. I worked in the garden in the mornings, in the afternoon in the workshop, and on Saturdays I sold my wares at the market. I made a few friends, not close, but pleasant people with whom I could have a beer, discuss the news, laugh at a good joke. Marilyn became an important part of my life. We often had dinner together, sometimes went to concerts at the local church or to shows at galleries. She never asked about my past, and I never asked about her divorce. We lived in the present, and that was enough. One day, while walking along the beach, we came across an old abandoned boat pulled up on the sand. It was in deplorable condition, peeling paint, cracked wood, corroded metal parts. "It's a shame to see such beauty go to waste," Marilyn said, running her hand along the side of the boat. I took a closer look at the boat. Beneath the layers of old paint and dirt was a beautiful handmade vessel, with graceful lines and thoughtful construction. "It can be restored, I said, feeling the familiar urge to create and rebuild rise up inside me. "Really?" Marilyn looked at me with interest. "Do you know how to repair boats?" "I've never tried, but the principles are the same as in any other woodwork. You have to understand the structure, find the damage, replace what can't be salvaged, strengthen what's still holding." We found out that the boat belonged to an old fisherman who died a few years ago. His son, who lived in another town, didn't know what to do with the boat and was delighted when I offered to buy it back for a token sum. I devoted the next few months to restoring the boat. It was a big project requiring skills I didn't have before, but I learned as I went along. I read books, watched instructional videos, and consulted with local fishermen. Marilyn often came to help. She proved adept at sanding and painting. Working on the boat became a kind of metaphor for my new life. Like that old vessel, I was damaged, battered by life's storms, but still capable of recovery, of new journeys. A year after I moved to Carmel, I received another letter from Quentin. He wrote that Ethan had finally paid off all his debts and had even managed to save a small amount of money for a down payment on an apartment. He had changed jobs, getting a position with better prospects, and, according to mutual acquaintances, seemed calmer and more confident than ever. "He still asks about you, Paul," Quentin wrote, "but no longer with despair, but with acceptance and hope. I think he understood the lesson you wanted to teach. I've been pondering this letter for a long time. Part of me will always love Ethan. He is my son, after all. But I also realize that our paths had parted, perhaps forever. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to let a person face the consequences of their actions, even if it hurts both of them." That night, Marilyn and I sat on the beach watching the sunset. The restored boat bobbed in the shallows, ready for its first voyage. "What are you thinking about?" Marilyn asked, noticing my pensive expression. "About the choices we make, about the roads we take and the roads we leave." She nodded, understanding without explanation. "You know, Paul, I've been meaning to ask you for a long time, but I've been hesitant. Are you running away from someone?" I looked at her, surprised at the directness of the question. "Why would you think that?" "Just an observation. You never talk about the past. You don't have pictures of your family except your wife. You occasionally check to see if anyone is following you when we come back from the market." I sighed. Marilyn was more observant than I thought. "I'm not running away. I'm just put the past behind me." "What's the difference?" I pondered her question. "Running away means being afraid, constantly looking over your shoulder. Leaving behind means making a conscious choice to start a new chapter." Marilyn smiled. "That's a good answer, and I believe you're telling the truth, at least the part of it you're willing to share." We were silent, watching the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon. "Sometimes," Marilyn finally said, "the only way to deal with a toxic relationship is to break it off completely. not to try to fix what's irreparably broken, not to waste energy on people who suck it out, to just walk away and start over. I looked at her in surprise. It was as if she had read my mind. Are you speaking from experience? Perhaps, she smiled enigmatically. We all have secrets, Paul, and sometimes the best friendship is one in which we respect each other's right to those secrets. I nodded, feeling deeply grateful for her understanding. As we drove back home, I looked back at the boat bobbing on the soft waves. Tomorrow would be her maiden voyage after years of neglect. A new beginning for the old vessel, as it was for me. I didn't regret my decision to disappear, to start a new life. It was a drastic step, but a necessary one. The toxic relationship with Ethan and Darcy was destroying me, poisoning my last years with bitterness and frustration. Leaving meant not only preserving my dignity and finances, but also giving Ethan a chance to grow up, to learn to take responsibility for his decisions. Sometimes the most important lessons in life are learned through loss and disappointment. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what's really important. I hoped Ethan had learned that lesson. I had learned mine. My new life in Carmel wasn't perfect. I still had moments of loneliness, regret for lost time, longing for the past, but they became less frequent, less acute. In their place came a quiet acceptance of the present, a gratitude for each day spent at peace with myself. I found a new community, a new calling, new friendships. I found a peace I hadn't known in years, and maybe that was more important than anything I had left behind. As we approached my cottage, Marilyn shook my hand in farewell. See you tomorrow, Paul. Don't forget to bring food for the picnic on the boat. I won't forget, I smiled. Thank you for today. For what? For understanding, for not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. She nodded. We're all entitled to our secrets, Paul, and a second chance. As I watched her walk away down the quiet street, I thought about the second chance I'd given myself, about the new life I'd built from the rubble of the old one, about the lessons I'd learned and the ones I hoped Ethan had learned. I didn't know if I would ever see my son again. Our paths may have parted forever the day I left Los Angeles with a suitcase of belongings and a determination to start fresh. But I knew I had done what I had to do, for myself and ultimately for him. Sometimes the only way to deal with a toxic relationship is to break it off completely, even if it breaks your heart, even if it means leaving behind the person you love. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting the other person fall so they can learn to get up on their own. I opened the door of my cottage and stepped inside. Tomorrow would be a new day with new opportunities and adventures, and I was ready for it like I had never been before.